The Ohtani story can be about gambling in the micro. In the macro, to me, what it is about is this. You can't, in any walk of life, whether it be the United Nations, international communication, or the world's greatest baseball player, have just one factor authentication on your interpreter. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I mean this adamantly. Every time I read anything about the Ohtani story, what comes to mind is got to have two interpreters. The idea that you would ever be totally reliant on one other person in all communications, in all business dealings, financial dealings, everything, it's one guy. Of course that guy is susceptible to corruption. Of course you're susceptible to getting robbed. You gotta go two interpreters. And I'm not blaming Ohtani for this because it seems like the solo interpreter is what everyone always does. But that has always struck me as perilous. If the interpreter has his own ulterior motives or dishonesty or whatever, and it doesn't have to be a gambling problem allegedly, it could be anything. It could be, you know what? I'm mad at the guy I work for. I want him to look like a jerk in the media. It could be, I don't like that reporter. I don't want his actual smart question to be perceived as a smart question. I can't imagine, and I really empathize with Ohtani or with anyone that has to do business dealings or real communication through an interpreter, because you've got to feel a little powerless. And because of that, and the reason I'm starting there, it is because of that I tend to believe Ohtani. So here's what I mean. And this is the angle that I don't think enough people have looked at it from. If every single interaction you have with your employer, with your teammates, with your sponsors is run through another individual who is literally translating, that obviously is the person you trust more than any person in the world. That obviously is a person who would have access to your bank accounts. That obviously is a person you would implicitly believe in. And so, like, who would be the easiest person in the world for me to scam? The answer is DeMonze or my wife or Diora. Not because they're dumb, but because we operate from a place of, like, implicit trust. If DeMonte called me and was, you know what I mean, as he did actually a few months ago, was like, hey, what's your recommendations on how I file taxes? Like, that conversation starts from a place of, this person will only ever give me good advice, will only ever, or even if it's not good advice, give me what they think is good advice, and will only ever have my best interests at heart. And so if in that moment, I was like, oh boy, I got upside down in some investments, my credit's wrecked, and I need to start fresh, I'm going to rip off DeMonze's credit, he would be the easiest mark in the world because of our relationship. So if Ohtani relies on this guy for everything, then of course this guy could rip him off for millions of dollars. And so that is then where I actually, when it comes to the Ohtani part of this, have more of an issue with the Dodgers. And so this is a paragraph from The Athletic that I think is the most intriguing part of the story. Also, a quote, also under scrutiny is how the Dodgers and Ohtani's representatives entrusted Mizuhara, who's the interpreter, entrusted Mizuhara enough to have him be the lone point person to Ohtani while they knew Mizuhara was the subject of this line of questioning. Rather, they followed their typical order of operations. Every communication went from the Dodgers, Agent Nez Balelo, pardon me if I mispronounced it, or his representatives at CAA went through Mizuhara, even without Ohtani present. This meant no one from the Dodgers or CAA supposedly ever talked to Ohtani directly about the looming story involving Mizuhara before the interpreter talked to the entire team after Wednesday's opener. Mizuhara now claims he never misinterpreted anything while interpreting for Ohtani. But think about that for a moment. What that is saying is that the Dodgers and Ohtani's representatives were aware that there were these allegations of some level of impropriety by the interpreter. And at no point did they then be like, hey, can we find someone else that speaks Japanese? Call them in here. Get Shohei in here. Tell the interpreter to go somewhere else for a minute while we make sure Shohei knows everything. That is wild. That is so irresponsible. That, to me, is the most suspicious part of this. The idea that they would say, oh my goodness, the interpreter is subjected to a gambling probe. Somebody's got to tell Ohtani. We'll have the interpreter do it. What? That seems like, at best, incredibly careless and at worst nefarious. And the reason I say at worst nefarious is it makes me wonder if everyone was hoping that somehow this story could just go away. That somehow that the company line of interpreter did all of this on his own, and then Ohtani, because he's such a great guy, just covered the debts. That's the cleanest version of this. Because the new version, which is the interpreter did all this on his own and then stole from Ohtani, that involves not MLB investigations, not even just IRS investigations, but federal investigations. That involves subpoena power, that involves depositions, that involves talking under oath. And it would, again, my initial read on it is folks were hoping that this could go away, and it obviously isn't. Now, as a gambler, there are also a lot of other, to me, curious questions that arose, up to and including what bookie is giving this guy multiple millions of dollars in credit. I'm sure will be made whole at some point. Unless the guy was representing, listen, I'm backed by one of the biggest sports stars in the world. Now, that doesn't mean he was backed by one of the biggest sports guys in the world. The idea that this got to millions and then the marker was called in strikes me as abnormal. None of this implies Ohtani's to blame here or that Ohtani had knowledge of it. Hey, thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button to get more from the show and make sure to click the bell to get notified every time new content drops. Check out full episodes of What's Right wherever you get your podcasts, or just click the link in the description below.